Hey everyone, and welcome back to Agonizing. Back in 1998, three friends decided to explore a brutally tight and unforgiving cave in the United States, a place that could give even seasoned cavers chills just by looking at it. But they weren't seasoned cavers, and since this story ended up here on the channel, you can probably guess things didn't exactly work out in their favor. Today we're diving into a caving adventure that went so wrong, it turned into more than 42 straight hours of suffering. It was a Saturday morning, July 18th, 1988, when Craig Douglas, his sister Jessica Douglas, and their friends Buster Miller and Jennifer Russell reached the entrance of Keyhole Cave, Section C. The excitement was real. The woods around them were calm and peaceful, the kind of summer morning that makes you feel like an adventure is calling. It wasn't their first time there. The year before, they had gone part way into the cave, which stretched about 360 feet, but turned back before reaching the deepest point. This time, they were determined to push all the way through. Keyhole Cave had a reputation for its suffocating passages where you had to crawl, twist, and squeeze your body into positions that felt impossible to hold. The deepest point sat about 110 feet below the surface, and getting there meant crawling through a passage barely a foot high, followed by an 8-foot vertical drop. With headlamps strapped on and knee pads secured, they started down. The moment they stepped inside, it felt like a different world. The temperature dropped, the air grew still, and the only sounds were their breathing and the scrape of gear against damp rock. For the first couple of hours, things went smoothly. They slowly pushed through the maze of narrow corridors, each squeeze demanding constant effort, until they finally reached the infamous Paul's Passage, also nicknamed Paul's Pipe, the last choke point before the final drop. It was a painfully low tunnel, barely high enough to slide through. Craig went first. He exhaled, flattening his chest, and began crawling forward. The rock pressed into his ribs and hips, every inch an ordeal. With his arms pinned tight, he relied on his legs to push, the soles of his boots dragging across the wet stone. The tunnel funneled straight toward the edge of the 8-foot pit, where he had to carefully position himself before dropping down. But then something went wrong. His left foot got wedged in a crack, locking his boot in place. Frustrated, he shifted to pull free, and in the process, his right knee slipped between two jagged slabs of rock. A sharp pain shot through his leg. The loose stones shifted just enough to trap him even tighter, clamping down on his knee from every direction. His breath caught, heart pounding as he tried to pull back. Every attempt only made it worse. It was like the cave had clamped shut on his leg like a vice. The rough rock scraped his skin raw, and each movement sent another wave of pain stabbing upward. Panic came fast. He realized he was stuck in a dangerous spot. His body angled downward, his weight pulling against his trapped leg. If he slipped, he'd be left dangling above the drop, his knee being crushed by his own body. Sweat dripped down his face. Half of his body was practically hanging over the drop, his arms pinned tight against the narrow walls. Every tiny movement sent a fresh surge of pain. It felt like the cave was swallowing him whole. Jessica, who was crawling right behind, immediately realized this was spiraling out of control. For about 15 minutes, Craig fought to free himself. Miller squeezed into the tunnel to try and help, but the space was so tight he could barely move. He tugged at Craig, tried shifting him around, but that knee just wouldn't budge. Craig's legs started to swell quickly. His breathing grew ragged. His arms shook with the effort. The pain burned like fire, and the pressure made it feel like the bone was splintering inside. The position made everything worse, with blood rushing straight to his head. Craig grew nauseous, dizzy, on the edge of blacking out. He knew he had to straighten up or he'd pass out right there. With a desperate burst of effort, he managed to twist his torso just enough to brace himself better. It wasn't much. He was supporting nearly all his weight with what little strength he had left, forcing his head and shoulders upright while his legs stayed firmly trapped. His heartbeat pounded in his chest. The space seemed to shrink tighter and tighter around him. It was clear they needed outside help. Jennifer Russell, the fastest in the group, was sent back toward the surface to get rescue. She disappeared into the tunnels while the others tried to improvise support. They stuffed clothing into the cracks to relieve some of the pressure on his body, but it barely made a difference. By the time the first rescuers reached him, Craig had been stuck for over 5 hours. His situation was dire. His leg was swollen, the circulation cut off. If they couldn't free him soon, he risked losing the leg, maybe even his life. The rescue was painfully slow. The space was so tight that only one person could work at a time. They tried pulling him, shifting his body, even pouring water and cooking oil on the rock to help him slide free. Nothing worked. Then a new threat appeared: the cold. The chill of the stone was draining the heat right out of him, and Craig began shaking uncontrollably. If it went on much longer, hypothermia would set in. The rescuers wrapped him in a space blanket, slipped a piece of carpet under his hips, and ran an extension cord down the cave to power a heat blower. That was the only thing keeping him conscious. But as the night wore on, an even bigger danger surfaced. The air quality plummeted. Even the rescuers started struggling to breathe. Oxygen levels had dropped to just 16.9%. Everyone in that chamber was slowly suffocating, not just Craig. Time was running out for all of them. An improvised ventilation system was thrown together. Through hoses, fresh air was pumped down into the tunnels, buying them a little relief and making it possible to keep going. With oxygen stabilized, all attention turned back to freeing Craig. By now, he had been trapped for over 30 hours. His body was giving out. His leg didn't even feel like a part of him anymore, just a heavy, lifeless weight. Only if every other attempt failed. They tried a new plan. Using drills and pneumatic chisels, they began shaving away the rock bit by bit. The cramped tunnel allowed only one rescuer at a time, making the work exhausting and slow. The roar of the tools echoed through the cave, mixing with Craig's faint, ragged breathing. He was hardly shivering anymore, which was a bad sign. It meant the hypothermia was taking over. Even so, the rescuers refused to let him give up. They talked to him constantly, reminding him of the sunlight above, the fresh air waiting for him, the people counting on him to make it out. Craig could no longer answer. His lips were cracked, his throat dry from dehydration. But deep down, he heard every word. Finally, after endless hours of drilling, they carved out a small opening. It wasn't much, but it gave them one last desperate chance. The rescuers couldn't reach the final spot, so they handed the drill to Craig himself. It was all or nothing. His fingers barely responded as he gripped the tool. After more than 30 hours trapped, it all came down to this. He summoned whatever strength he had left. His arms trembled, his muscles burned. Half suspended over the drop, he pressed the drill against the rock. His teeth clenched as the vibration shook through his whole body. His vision blurred, the world spun, and then something gave way. For the first time in almost 2 days, his leg moved. The rock that had locked him in finally loosened its grip. With the last shred of strength he had, Craig pulled himself free. It was 8:30 p.m. on Sunday. The relief was overwhelming. Every nerve in his body lit up in agony as blood rushed back into his leg. It felt like he was burning alive from the inside. Too weak to stand, he collapsed against the stone, while rescuers held him steady, letting him just breathe, feel, exist. At last, the cave had released him. But the nightmare wasn't over. His leg was in ruins. The long hours without circulation had left it useless, unable to bear weight. Every movement was torture. Supported by rescuers, he had to crawl, climb, and squeeze his way back out, inch by inch. The journey to the surface took more than 8 hours. At 9:15 on Monday morning, after 43 hours underground, Craig finally emerged into daylight. He was rushed to the hospital, where surgeons performed emergency procedures to try and save his shattered leg. Recovery would take months, but he had survived. Craig Douglas faced the worst nightmare imaginable in a cave and lived to tell the tale. If you've made it this far, I'm guessing you enjoyed this story. And if you did, there's another one on the screen right now that you'll probably like just as much. Thanks so much for sticking with me, and I'll see you in the next video.